But the communication skills that I think are the most important is listening. Listening as if what people are saying is gold, and it's my job to mine that gold. And that is one of the most powerful things I have taught in all my workshops is something called generous listening, where when someone says something, rather than responding and saying, oh, that reminds me of a time, you say, interesting, tell me more. Like a glass full of water, just let them drain that whole thing out until you keep saying anything else. What else? What else? And they finally say, that's it.
You know, that's really interesting. Can you tell me more? Leadership and management are two different things. However, many of us have grown to believe that these are the same thing. In corporate organizations, failing to grasp the distinction between management and leadership is one of the key contributing factors that prevent organizations from utilizing their full potential. In this episode of Establishing Your Empire, we have a fascinating conversation with an expert business consultant who helps businesses transform and achieve seemingly impossible results. Kimberly Wiefling, founding member and global consultant at Silicon Valley Alliances, joins us today to talk about transforming managers into leaders, how to fix the most common causes of failure in global teams, and how to create a predictable and repeatable process to innovate on purpose. You're listening to the Establishing Your Empire show, a podcast that inspires entrepreneurs, creatives, and future business owners to pursue their passions, grow their organizations, and build their empire. My name is Daran Herrman, and creatively, I'm best known for my photography. But business-wise, my claim to fame is growing a company from $15K per month in online sales to breaking the $1 million a month barrier. And I'm sitting down with interesting people to talk about their process, the lessons they've learned, and how they have established their empires. All right, I got Kimberly Wiefling here on the Establishing Your Empire podcast. I'm very excited to host you here today because what Kimberly does, she shocks companies into fixing the things that will damage or destroy their organizations. With an intro like that, you have to be excited about this. When people ask you, who is Kimberly? What do you usually say?
Well, sometimes I say, I'm a force of nature, the good kind, not like hurricanes and tornadoes. No, really. And then if they really want to hear my corporate pitch, it's turn managers into leaders. It's different, okay? Turn groups of people into true teams that can together achieve what would seem impossible for any one of them alone. And how do they do that? Following common sense, which sadly, as you probably know by now in your life, Daran, is not common practice. How hard is this, people?
I love it. So actually, that's an interesting place to start. How do you actually transform somebody from a manager to a leader?
The first thing is raising their awareness that they're different. I mean, we grow up not understanding the distinction between management and leadership. Then we experience the soul-sucking management approach. And, I go all over the world and I ask people, hey, raise your hand if you like to be managed. I remember I was in Bulgaria speaking to a group of 3,000 people. And I said, what, do you not understand my English? Please raise your hand if you like to be managed. And they're like, no, Kimberly, we understand you just fine. Nobody wants to be managed, okay? Manage cows, lead people. And what I do first is I ask people to think about what are the things that a manager does and what does a leader do? And I have a whole bunch of words and we do a little graph and they just graph these words on whether they're high management, high leadership, both or neither. And what I find out is managers in general in the world have a very negative vibe. And that's why there's books out there called Boss Hole. So once they raise their awareness of what's the difference between a manager and a leader, then it helped them understand the 30 years of research from Barry Posner and Jim Kouzes, who wrote the Leadership Challenge, 30 years of research and companies all over the world, not just American leaders. Okay, thank you very much. Over 70 different countries saying, if you have these 5 practices and these 6 behaviors in each of these 5 areas, and you just do them more frequently, people will think you're a better leader. It doesn't even matter if you feel like it.
And so my degree is actually organizational leadership with a corporate emphasis. And this was back, I went to college in the early 2000s. So this was not a common degree that you'd get. So people would always ask, okay, what is leadership? What does that mean? And I usually just gave them the very quick, hey, basically it's a business major with more of a people approach, empowering others, creating mutually benefiting situations, that type of stuff. Because I didn't want to get into the whole thing, but I, I'm pretty sure all my professors will be like loving hearing what you were just saying.
Well, you know what? My engineering colleagues, some of them have said, "Oh, Kimberly, that's touchy-feely crap." And I'm like, "Yeah, well, that's the reason that over 80% of global teams fail to achieve their goals, and over 30% of global teams say, 'We just suck as a team.'"
And I've read that you've been involved in over like a dozen startups or around there. Let's go back. Let's start the origin story. How did you get started? How did your first dip into entrepreneurship happen?
I was working at Hewlett Packard as a typical employee. I had no sense of entrepreneurship at all. But somehow I got this idea in my mind. Yeah, I want to start my own business. What the heck was I thinking? So I found this organization that at that time was called the Forum for Women Entrepreneurs. And I joined and they let me. And so I hung around all these other entrepreneurs and I started to think, well, that's not so hard. And so in 1995, when I was still working at Hewlett Packard, I printed out some business cards with my first business name, which was such a geeky name called Laplace Career Transforms. Only a mathematician would get the joke on that. And I started giving it to people, telling them I'm doing career coaching. And they believed me, Daran. That's all. I just print business cards, give them out, and tell people you're in business and they believe you. And then it was a time when Hewlett Packard was laying off tens of thousands of people. This was the company that never did layoffs. Well, they were laying people off. And I was really good at getting jobs because I had moved around in HP to 7 different jobs in my time there. And so I started doing career coaching for people for free in exchange for feedback and testimonials and referrals. And they said, "You're better than the company HP hired to help us." And that company was very prestigious. So I'm like, pretty cool. So that's where it started. And we were off to the races from there.
And it's very similar to just any kind of startup. Just, a lot of tech startups would have this kind of plan of, hey, develop a pitch, go out there and get customer feedback, and then interpret that feedback and try to get product market fit and try to get, where people are asking for it. I think that same kind of design can be going off to various types of companies. It doesn't have to be some tech SaaS startup to be able to do that. It's wonderful that you did that without charging. Were you just so interested in that area because you're a physicist? I mean, you weren't like, you're not a people person, right? You're not supposed to be one, right?
Oh my God, I had no people skills. I should have studied psychology or leadership like you, Daran. Yeah, I just realized that there were people who had worked at HP their entire lives. One guy actually, after he got the notice he was laid off, he walked out into the parking lot and had a heart attack, right? And one of these people said to me, "It's like getting a divorce." And so they were losing their connection to their community. And I felt real compassion for them. I'm a very sensitive, emotional person. And so I just wanted to help. And so I'm like, hey, I'm good at doing resumes. I'm good at getting jobs. I'm good at interviewing. And then I started to teach at the Career Action Center. And so that gave me a little more confidence. I did some workshops down there. And little by little, I realized I have a skill to facilitate experiences for people in workshops that they cannot get from a class or, God forbid, the T word, training. Don't like to use that word. I do not do training. Training is for circus animals. Ugh.
And do you remember your first paying client and how did you get that person?
Oh my gosh. I just had all these people, like 10 or 15 people that I was doing career coaching for free. And then I started to do some executive coaching. And I called up 5 of my executive buddies and I said, "I'm launching my executive coaching business and I'd love to give you a free hour of my time in exchange for your feedback on my process." And 3 of them said, "When can you get here?" And 2 of them said, "When can you come back?" And they wanted to pay me. So it was sort of accidental. And then when I realized that what I was doing was valuable, I started to research, okay, how much do people charge for this? And I joined the Institute of Management Consultants, and you can get salary surveys and all kinds of information from organizations like that. And I started doing that. Then it was just mostly by accident, right? Accidents, possibilities show up when you make yourself available. Opportunities drop from the sky and you can see them.
I think it's one of the, and I don't remember who this is coined to, but I attribute it to increasing the service area of your luck by doing, creating actions and doing things and putting yourself out there. And you talk about pricing a little bit. How did you figure out how to price your services? How did you do it back then? How do you do it now? It's always so difficult for so many different people.
Yeah. I underpriced my services pathetically. As often the case is, there's even a whole book about how women don't know their value and don't get paid what they're worth because they don't ask for it. And eventually I hired a person, paid him $3,000 to help me set my pricing strategy. And he helped me understand I was grossly underpricing and that people don't want to hire somebody who seems too cheap because that undermines your integrity and your credibility. So you got to be priced fairly in the market. And so with the next client that negotiated with me for a contract, I raised my prices in my bid to them and they said, okay, not even an argument. So I made up the $3,000 and more in my first client after that. So yeah, it's helpful from the outside to get some perspective and some data on what you're really worth. Because what I do for my clients, I mean, one of my clients, I've saved them over $5.5 million in recruiting and retraining because of reducing the voluntary turnover just from a simple 27-hour workshop with me.
And that's really the value. When you start thinking of value, it makes it easier as opposed to pricing on your time or by the hour. I think that gets difficult. Another way that I think of pricing your own services, especially if you're like a solopreneur, is ask your significant other what you should be priced at because they're going to probably up it or whatever dollar amount that you put you were going to say, double it and then say it over and over and over and over and over in your head because you're going to get asked for your pricing and whatever falls out of your mouth, you want it to be the right number, not the low number that will happen.
So I have a pricing sheet and I'm happy to share it with anybody who would like access to that. I never send it to my customers. It is to remind me of what I'm worth by the hour. If they hire me for 10 hours, 100 hours, or by the workshop, if it's highly customized or if it's off the shelf, I've got my pricing very clearly outlined so I know what I'm worth. And that's really important thing to have as an entrepreneur. So you know what you're worth. You don't have to send that price sheet to your clients.
Yeah, I agree with that too. And I've done something very similar because sometimes people start asking you prices and you want to, if you have a structure like that, you'd be like, oh, let me just refer to my sheet. It becomes easier as opposed to you seem like you're pulling a price out of thin air. And a lot of times when you do pull that price out of thin air, it's not a good one. It's usually a lower one than it should be.
You know, and I know there's value in this value pricing thing, but I kind of avoid that because I do not want to manage scope or scope creep. So I like the hourly thing where I say, hey, buy 100 hours and you'll get a discount on my hourly rate. I'll keep track of it over time and I'll charge you for everything, time I'm writing you email or on the phone or everything. But some people want to do more of a value pricing approach. I'm not so good at that, but my recent experience with that was I said, okay, you want a 4-month retainer, let's say $60,000 for 4 months in this rough scope of work. And my client says, make it 75. I'm like, okay. So they insisted on it. So I'm still not good at pricing my work. And then turns out they're also working with one of these big consulting firms that charge a whole bunch of money. And I was doing such a great job. They thought I was really contributing so much value. They felt really guilty about paying the big consulting firm so much more. So they said, bill us for another $50,000. And I'm like, seriously? And then I said, okay, I'm going to keep working with you. If I'm going to bill you for that much more, let's at least do a wrap up or phase 2. And they're like, okay. I mean, this is great. When your clients are saying they got to pay you. I got one more story, Daran, if you would allow me, that's specific about the pandemic. Pandemic happened March 2020. Everything I had on the books was canceled. I've been working with some of these clients for 8, 10, 15 years. I reached out to them, the top clients, and I said, whatever you need. Sorry, pandemic pricing, free. Just let me practice doing all this stuff virtually and you give us feedback and help us pivot to this new normal. So me and my team and a bunch of other consulting colleagues who were helping each other pivot, we all started offering anything we could to these people, workshops and discussion groups and activities and sessions where they would talk about the pandemic and how to pivot to their new normal. After 2 months, two of the big companies said, Kimberly, we've got to start paying you. So, because I really felt like this was a time to build relationships, not my bank account. This was a crisis for the whole world. And I wasn't going to say, well, I'll help you if you can pay me. No, I'm going to help you pay what you want, pay whatever you think is appropriate. And if you don't have budget, we'll make it work somehow.
That's fantastic. Did you find any different strategies for the virtual versus the in-person for what you're doing or in general?
And it's amazing. I really never wanted to be a fully virtual workshop facilitator. I was flying all over the world. Every month I was on an airplane or gone 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 weeks in a row. Came back from Japan, January 2020. Haven't been on an airplane since. And my whole business has been recreated thanks to my wonderful team, my wonderful colleagues, Silicon Valley Alliances, and our revenues are back up to where they were the year before the pandemic. Doing workshops virtually. Here's the one cool thing that's possible. You can have everybody from the whole world join together as long as I'm willing to sleep in my clothes and wake up at 3 in the morning. So I can
Right?
3 to 7 a.m. California time. I can have people from the entire planet together and nobody has to get on an airplane or otherwise distract them from the rest of their lives.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And so you talked about Silicon Valley Alliances, and let's get to that in a minute. But let's go back. Like, how did that first company, how did that go? Like when you finally started getting these clients and you got revenue, we talked about that. How did that first company go?
Well, they were very surprised that we were able to have such an interactive, engaging experience. I mean, we don't just do lecture, we do all kinds of activities and props and interaction and throwing things around. So we figured out, how do you throw something and someone on another video somewhere in the world catches it? And then how do we all draw together on a whiteboard? I had over 120 people at one keynote I did say, draw a face. I put 2 dots on the whiteboard, draw a face. And in 2 minutes, 122 people collaborated to draw an amazing face. We virtualized almost every single one of our exercises. The breakout rooms in Zoom turned out to be a godsend because you put people in breakout rooms. It's just like going to your separate flip charts. And one of my brilliant colleagues at Silicon Valley Alliances, Steph Parent, he figured out how to virtualize some really complicated exercises that I never would have imagined possible. And now I have to sit there and say, I don't even know if we should go back to in-person when it's safe, because this is pretty awesome.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of companies that completely pivot, and now you can have both, of course. But there is so many advantages of the virtual. There could be somebody that would normally not join because they work from a different state, and all of a sudden now they can join. Right? They wouldn't normally be able to get your services, but they can jump in. So tell us about Silicon Valley Alliances. How did that start, and what is it?
Well, I was working with an agent in Tokyo that I had met here in the Silicon Valley. They were bringing Japanese companies here. I somehow got introduced to them because I was teaching some leadership workshops. And then the one person who came here said, hey, why don't you come to Japan and do these workshops? I said, sure. And turns out it was the biggest English language teaching company in all of Japan. It was at that time called ALC Press, ALC Education. And they had nothing like what we were doing. And so I recruited people to come over with me and do these workshops, which ranged from a half a day of leadership to 15-day, 30-day programs that extended over 6 months to a year. So I brought all these experts from the Silicon Valley to augment my skills. And I met other people there in Japan who were awesome facilitators who assisted me. And over the years, things changed, and that company was acquired by another company that wanted to focus only on English. And we said, heck with that. We're starting Silicon Valley Alliances. And we launched it. And now, of course, companies don't want to hire Kimberly Wiefling, a big, huge company like Yamaha Motors doesn't want to hire Kimberly Wiefling. They want to hire Silicon Valley Alliances. It's so exciting, right? You got to name your startup something that attracts your clients. But when they send me the money, it's to Wiefling Consulting.
Yeah, and I think there's something about that with the storytelling, right? Everybody's buying a story, and be cognizant of what the story their client wants to buy and what they have to, and also that person has a manager. Like, it's easier to hire, like you said, this fancy company name as opposed to a person, and especially if the dollar amount is not tiny, it definitely helps. That's something that even so early on, about 2008, not early on, but 2008, I started a photo video company. And instead of doing like Daran Herrman, I always had a different name because I think it just sounded more professional.
Well, you sure wouldn't want to eat sushi if they called it raw dead fish.
That's great. So you've done some keynote speaking in your career. How do you increase your communication skills? What's some tips and tricks that you've learned along the way?
Well, keynote speaking for me is just another opportunity to engage and connect people meaningfully. So for me, when I do keynote speaking, I'll do something like, hey, I'm in front of an audience of 3,000 people. Everyone stand up, find someone close to you, tell them your whole life story starting from birth, give them the 2-minute version. So I make it like a giant workshop. And I really don't like to just do a talk. But the communication skills that I think are the most important, besides what you mentioned, storytelling, of course, is listening. Listening as if what people are saying is gold, and it's my job to mine that gold. And that is one of the most powerful things I have taught in all my workshops, is something called generous listening, where when someone says something, rather than responding and saying, oh, that reminds me of a time, you say, interesting, tell me more. And just shut up and let them continue. Like a glass full of water, just let them drain that whole thing out until you keep saying anything else. What else? What else? And they finally say, that's it. Nobody listens like that. This is like giving oxygen to a drowning person. And I'll tell you, we've taught this in all of my workshops, no matter what the title is. And we got a letter from someone's wife who said, what did you do to my husband? He listens to me now.
That's really interesting. Can you tell me more?
Yeah. The problem in our society is when we think about leaders, we think about somebody leading from the front, saying, come on, follow me. And they're the smartest person in the room. And they got all the ideas. Well, guess what? We're playing a game only a team can win. And if that's the kind of leader you are, you're doomed. So real leaders access the group genius, the team genius. And real leaders say to their team, yeah, we want to be at the top of that mountain 2 months from now. I have no idea how to do it. Got any ideas? Interesting. Tell me more. Let's think of at least one idea that would never work. Let's think of at least one idea that would for sure fail. One idea that would get me fired. And encourage people to feel free to speak into the space that you're holding for that.
And one thing I've learned on that area is it does sometimes take a while for someone to process their thoughts and get it out of there. And I've always been kind of that quick person and like almost save them when they're trying to think of something, or they pause, or they can't come up with whatever they're trying to say right away. And one of the things I've been working on and still have a lot of work to do is to allow that pause to happen, that let them be, let it sit for a minute.
Yeah, that's common in some cultures, like in Singapore. If you just start talking as soon as the other person stops, it's considered quite rude. I have colleagues I work with who have like 180 IQ. And literally, I've had to sit and wait for 8 seconds after a question for them to respond because they are processing it deeply. That's a very painful pause, Daran.
Absolutely. And if you know that there could be something behind there, or not even know, it's not that long, it's 8 seconds, but it feels like a long time. And I think stuff like this podcast, or even, practicing with your friends, when you're just hanging out with them and not letting them know that you're practicing, it's a very beneficial structure, especially when you're talking to managers or your followers or whatever it might be. you'll realize that it's a different conversation when you just kind of stop talking and start listening, as you're saying.
Of course, my specialty is helping people do what seems impossible. And impossible, what that means is you don't know how to do it right now. You right now cannot imagine how to do it. Now, then I ask people, what percent of everything in the entire universe do you personally know? And usually people say 0.00001% or something like that. All right. So if I tell you an idea or a dream or a crazy goal for my startup or my entrepreneurial venture, and you can't immediately think of how it could be achieved, what should you do? Shut the
I think
fuck up and listen and say, that's a great idea. Interesting. Tell me more. And don't try to kill my idea because, dude, something in the 99.99999% that you don't know could make it possible, even easy. Ask Kodak, ask Nokia how it feels.
What about some advice to somebody that wants to get more in the either consulting or workshops boat mode? I think we see a lot of people out there trying to do these things. What advice would you give those people?
Study Knowles' adult learning theory. I was very fortunate in that one of my first jobs, part-time jobs, was teaching algebra for University of Phoenix, part-time for adult learners. University of Phoenix does not allow you to lecture, even if you're teaching algebra. So they put me through 20 hours of courses on how adults really learn in ways that are meaningful for them. And it doesn't happen by lecture. Reading a book about chocolate, you won't understand chocolate. Look at the chemical formula of chocolate, you won't understand chocolate. If you're overweight, like I'm 10 pounds overweight, reading a book that tells me eat less and exercise more won't help unless it's a heavy book I have to pick up over and over again, right? You've got to find ways to help people use adult learning, which means, yes, there's a theory or a concept. Learn it, teach it. Then you have to experience it, do an exercise, a game, an activity, then discuss and say, geez, I know better, but I still acted like that in this exercise, the simulation. And then how might I apply this in the real world? And then you hold people accountable, follow up, do something, take action. Yeah, great. You passed the course. Now go on and do things the same old stupid way you've always been doing. That doesn't change anything. I have no patience for that. So if you want to be in consulting, doing workshop facilitation, study Knowles' adult learning theory and use interactive, engaging, experiential approaches, not lecture. What you know, you're so smart. That doesn't help anybody. If knowing how
Yeah.
we're enough, we'd all be rich and thin.
And I think that's part of the reason why I think this intersection of what college is today versus what it might be in the future. I think a lot of this, industrial revolution style learning is not very exciting for a lot of people anymore. What about just like a normal day in your life? Any like routines or anything that keeps you kind of being this high performer that seems to work for you?
Yeah, I love to get up and go in the hot tub, listen to the birds chirping, maybe check out my Aura Ring sleep app and see how many times my cat woke me up. Then I would have some, try to catch up on email a little bit. I would schedule some meetings and sessions. I do have weekly sessions with my consulting collaborators in order to help me learn, grow, and pivot. We've changed those to every other week now, but we met every week for about 70 weeks for about an hour and a half. You got to go to places where you can learn from other people. You got to go to places where people are going to share and engage and interact. You can't just sit at home and clean out your inbox. I mean, when you die, your inbox will not be empty. So I try to learn something every day. I try to share something every day, have a little bit of fun. It's hard because I'm obsessed with getting stuff done. And I have this kind of overachiever restless syndrome that I'm trying to overcome. But we have to find ways to be a more well-rounded person if we really want to show up for the people in our lives, like our clients, in a healthy way.
And do you think that restless kind of syndrome where you always got to have something done, do you think that if you ever solve that in your brain, do you think you'd be as productive? Or is it kind of I have to starve to be an artist, right? I have to constantly, be worried about getting things done to get things done.
I'm a scientist, I'm a physicist by education, and I love research. And all the research shows that working yourself that hard without a break, you get less done. So some of the research shows that if you just work really hard for this many hours a day, after a couple of weeks, your productivity drops to 40%. So now you got to work 10 hours to get 4 hours worth of work done. So much as it might seem counterintuitive, you need to take breaks, you need to have some fun. By the way, I always tell people, oh, I don't like to have fun, but the research shows that if you're having fun, you're 300% more creative. So we have to, because literally some of the people I work with, they complain. I was working with some executives from Italy who are in the finance area on how to be more Silicon Valley mindset. And they complained, Kimberly forced us to have fun. That's the kind of evaluations I love to get. And actually, the other feedback I've gotten is, oh, she made us uncomfortable. Yeah, the goal of your workshop, as I was led to understand, was to become more of an innovative mindset and the kind of leaders who can drive change. And yet you don't want to be uncomfortable. Good luck with that. Everybody just cross your arms. Yeah, we always cross them the same way. Cross them the other way. Yeah, doesn't it feel wrong? It feels uncomfortable and awkward. There's nothing wrong with doing it the other way. It just feels uncomfortable. When you feel uncomfortable, it means you are making progress. I don't say jump into the danger zone, but get out of the comfort zone if you want to change in positive ways.
I also think the more often you're uncomfortable, the less uncomfortable it is, and putting it's stuff like this podcast, right? I'm over 50 episodes in. It's way less uncomfortable now than when it started, but there's still a level of discomfort because you're talking to high level people that are super interesting, have done all these things. And by the way, you got to make it interesting and steer the conversation and jump in and not fumble through your words and et cetera, et cetera. But each time is just a little easier than the time before.
That is absolutely right, Daran. If you want to do something well, you must first be willing to do it badly. And the first 500 times are the hardest. And there is no growth in the comfort zone. And so you just have to jump in. Like I call it diving off the cliff and inventing water on the way down, or growing wings and learning how to fly. So there has to be something that you care about more than your comfort. If you don't have something you care about more than being comfortable, good luck with that. You're never going to do anything amazing and great.
And you kind of already talked about a couple things, but I think this is important of like, what are some other tips and tricks about getting out of that comfort zone to start things or do things? Because I think a lot of I have the problem with perfection, but I've learned to force my way out of that. Like I want things to be all perfect before starting. Mm-hmm. So, I've learned that that's just an excuse to slow down and put a bunch of roadblocks before putting myself out there. Anything that you've seen out there or done?
Yeah. I personally am a big fan of this methodology called design thinking. It's a framework that brings together a lot of wonderful innovation and creativity ideas. And it's a recipe for how to predictably and repeatedly create breakthroughs. And it addresses head on this whole thing about perfectionism. Design thinking is talking about, hey, let's take necessary risks. Let's make mistakes that we learn from. Let's prototype. Let's experiment. Let's pilot. Let's fail forward. So if you start to talk yourself into this mindset of, let's do a small prototype. Let's do a simulation. Let's just try this out. We're committed to not being wildly successful the first time. Perfection is the enemy of the good enough. So design thinking methodology, prototyping, experimenting, piloting, and failing forward is my antidote to my own perfectionism.
What about your approach to marketing? How do you get new clients? How do you build your brand? Anything out there about like how you market your company or yourself?
Oh my gosh. I am so bad at marketing. I've never really been exceptional at it.
I already disagree because you've already gave some amazing, amazing marketing things. You must just use a different word for it. For instance, like you going out there and giving, hey, this is a new thing. We're not good at it. Let's go ahead and trial this for free for you. And then of course you go up there and back it up with your quality of service that you're going to do. And you're giving yourself you're allowing yourself to fail along the process, like you were just saying. But that to me is a wonderful bootstrapping, like guerrilla marketing way of getting yourself in front of these clients that you might not talk to you at that moment because they're all jumbled too.
You know what? I really love that you shared that with me. I will reinterpret that and maybe I'll think I am a good marketer. Because you're right. What I've done is I gave a lot of free keynotes for some organizations that were nonprofits. I wrote my book, Scrappy Project Management, at the urging of my publisher. It got me a lot of visibility. It got me a lot of invitations. It didn't directly turn into money right away. And then, I find the best source of my next client is the last one that I really cared about, that I really delighted, and I helped in ways they couldn't imagine was even possible. So I think that's my marketing now. It's all referrals, or literally somebody called me and said, "Hey, I was in your class 8 years ago at University of California, Santa Cruz, and now I'm working at this company. Can you help us?" I'm like, 8 years ago? They remember me? So yeah, somehow I stick in their minds. And finally, on the more traditional side, I met this wonderful guy, Tom Okada, and he was asking me, how do you change Japanese people? Because I work mostly with globalizing Japanese companies. And I said, oh, I don't change them. I just create an environment where they can choose to change if they want to. And then he volunteered to be my biz dev guy for free for like 2 years to try to find people who could use my services. And then when I finally got work through him, I paid him a finder's fee. And it has been just an amazing relationship.
And so I think what I'm hearing there is to continually have a very powerful brand is to constantly be honest, direct, and continually providing value. And I think those are a fantastic way to play the long game in marketing.
Yeah,
The
you
short
have
game
to
would be
be.
your sizzle reel, right? Your short game is your 30-second ad, right? And that's
Oh,
good too. You could do both, but I think to play that long game of
yeah.
doing it, if you're always kind of this consistent person out there, you will get that lead from 8 years ago that comes through.
Absolutely. I think it's about being authentic and truly caring about doing a great job for the people that you work with and being committed to adding value to them and making sure that they see the value. Now, sometimes it backfires because here's what happens. People call me, "Oh yeah, Kimberly, come and fix my people." Some executive, "Come and fix my people." Okay, whenever I find out that somehow you executives are contributing to the sick, twisted, dysfunctional nature of what's happening with your people, how do you want me to tell you? And then they say, oh, yeah, Kimberly, just tell us. Yeah, just tell us. Right. And then when I tell them, you know what happens back? Crickets.
Mhm.
Literally, I have had people leave money on retainers that they never use because I finally got to the point where I had to say to them, your people's biggest excuse for not making the changes you want is the way you're behaving. And if you don't change that, fire me and get another consultant.
And I think that's the power of a third party is actually that you could say that, right? As opposed to somebody who works in the organization.
Well, yeah, and I'm always willing to be that outside voice who comes in and calls a spade a freaking shovel and gets fired for it. I don't want the employees who have a kid in college, a mortgage payment, and a partner who doesn't work to have to take those kind of risks. So when I come in, I do what's required, and sometimes you're a hero and sometimes you're a zero. And I have lost a few very major clients because they decided that no, they didn't really, really, really want to commit to the changes required to transform themselves from managers into leaders, to transform their group of people into true teams. They just wanted to kind of perk along with their nice, comfortable life and be the boss holes that they were.
What about any mentors or books along the way that's really helped you?
Yes. My best mentor shocked me out of my own pathetic, helpless dysfunction about 1995, Barbara Fittipaldi. I was in a workshop about creating impossible things in the future. I was in my cynical, protecting myself from disappointment phase. And she said, "You don't own your own power. I don't ever want to hear you talking bad about yourself again." And I'm crying, "No, no, I really am a helpless victim." And then I decided to experiment with the tools she gave me by asking, what's possible? What seems impossible, but if it were possible, would transform my life, my work, my team, our world for the better? And what might make impossible possible? And I took that as like a religion for a while. And she transformed my entire life through that intervention. And then just before the pandemic, for the last couple of years before that, I was so lucky to meet Dr. Edgar Schein. He's the guy who created the term organizational culture. You may have heard of him, right? He's famous. And I had lunch with him every month for 3 years. I paid him to have lunch with me to help me understand how all of the work I was doing, whatever I called it, project management, leadership teams, it was all about transforming organizational culture. And thank God for Dr. Shine, because I could finally understand that my work was about people and teams and organizations in ways I never understood before.
I love it. And what do you think? Like, what's like 5 years from now? Like, where do you see yourself?
Well, here's what I'm asking myself. Why did I have to wait so many years till I was in my 30s and 40s to learn this stuff? Basic. This is basic common sense. It should be common knowledge. It should be common practice. So I have this crazy dream of creating Kimberly Camp, and or maybe we'll just call it Common Sense Camp. And I want everybody on planet Earth who wants it to be able to reach out and learn these basic principles so that they don't have to spend the first few decades of their working life making other people miserable or being miserable. And let's all be startups. Let's all act like entrepreneurs. Even if you're an employee, let's pretend that you own the company and lead from any chair without position and title. I want this common sense to be common knowledge and common practice and to transform planet Earth for the better. Yeah, it's crazy. It's big. But I've always wanted to transform planet Earth for the better. So help me, Daran.
My question was going to be like, why don't you start now with that? And it sounds like you kind of already are in a sense, but why wouldn't you start now?
It's so funny because just last week, one of my colleagues said, "Hey, Kimberly, why don't you put in a proposal for a grant to codify what you're doing in a way that would expand its reach to hundreds, thousands, millions, billions of people?" And so I am considering that right now. Right now, I'm taking a positive intelligence course from Stanford University that is all app based, and there's daily reminders and there's thinking partner teams. And it's really a great model. So I'm looking now through the lens of how might we pull together a group of people, create something that's accessible that would truly be transformative, but didn't require me to do it 20 people at a time.
Right, right,
So I'm just
right.
starting to noodle on that, Darren, and I look forward to co-conspiring with you if that's of interest.
I think it's very interesting. I think anything that has, I think whatever you're doing, if you have a mission behind it that you're truly passionate about, and when I'm saying mission, a lot of people think like, it has to be this give back to the world thing. It doesn't have to be, although this one is a little bit. I think that's very powerful because what will happen is you could pivot 18 different ways, but you'll figure out how to get there. Whether it's some app or a video series or it's this website or it is virtual events or in-person events, it doesn't matter. You'll figure out the engine to get to
Yeah,
your mission. And I think something like that would be very interesting because if you helped a lot of people, it doesn't have to be that expensive if the number of people is large,
that's right.
as opposed to it's taking what you have and flipping it from a smaller group to that pays a larger, per person to a large group that would pay very little per person, right?
Well, I
Awesome.
absolutely agree. So what I'm looking at is my work always has to have, for me to feel gratified, it's a purpose beyond profit, a mission that matters. And I strongly believe, looking at the world as it is these days, I strongly believe that the global businesses of this world have more impact potentially than any government, than even the United Nations, right? Like some of the companies that I help with their leadership and their teams, they do business in 110 countries. And we bring together, 20, 30, 50 people from 10 or 15 different countries in the same room or on the same virtual meeting. They don't have a problem with each other. And if their countries are fighting over some island in some forgotten sea somewhere, they don't care. And one of my colleagues from China said, Kimberly, people is people, government is government. So if we can transform these global organizations so that there are highly functioning, healthy environments where people know how to lead and understand that they are making money because they are solving problems profitably. Solving problems profitably means you can keep solving them next year. And I strongly believe that the global companies of this world have a highly incentivized position where they want to keep the world healthy, happy, sane, and at peace. Because how much profit do you think you're going to make if the world's falling apart, people are fighting and killing each other over food and water, or bombs are being dropped all around you? Only a few military companies going to make money there. But most of the companies of our world understand that is not where profit lies.
And I think the fact that they need to have profitability is not a bad thing. A lot of people just see that as bad, but money is fuel to me, and
That's right.
enable to you could reach so much more people, services, whatever it is, with that fuel that you get. And I think it's also one of the problems with the nonprofit world is no matter what happens, you're really kind of, hey, good job. We're all high fiving at the end of the day. Now, there's so many great things that happen in nonprofits. So there is great things, but I think a for-profit, typically just because they're looking at sustainable ways to grow, seems to be a better way to do it.
Well, there was some research done 2010. There's something called the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. At that time, it was 100 of the biggest companies on planet Earth, comprising over 10% of Earth's gross domestic product, GDP. And they did some work to scope out what's the future of the planet. They called it Vision 2050. And then they said, oh crap, we're screwed. And they realized that if they want to have a sustainable business, a profitable business, they cannot let the world fall apart. And so they created Action 2020. They put up a dashboard, what needs to change to keep us on a healthy path where organizations like for profit businesses can prosper. And last time I checked, they were off track on every single one of their measures. But you got to set a goal and, fail forward like we were talking about. So I think that those kinds of organizations are motivated by underlying purpose beyond profit, mission that matters, and profit, because it's been proven that if you have these healthy organizations, you make 20% more money and your stock price goes up more. There is no downside. The most sick, twisted, evil, dysfunctional company managers and executives on planet Earth should be calling me saying, please, Kimberly, help us because you're going to make more money, people.
I want to ask a couple more personal questions, which I think are fun. Take us back like way before, even before your master's in physics, back in high school. What advice would you give your like 16-year-old self?
My 16-year-old self, I hated being a teenager. Here's what I made up when I was 16. I said, sweet 16 is a sour soybean. So I would say, live in the future. Let your imagination wander to a time far in the future and make up extraordinary hallucinations of how your life may unfold in preposterously wonderful ways. Write them down and make a collage of them, and then keep focusing on that bright, shining light while you're slogging through the hell of being a teenager.
I think a lot of people could relate to that. What about like any regrets along the way of your professional or personal career, but mostly professional career?
It's so funny because I had some really big failures in my career, and I wish I had known at that time when I was having some of these big failures. I wish I had known that every failure is a door closing so that we can find the next door opening, and it's shifting us in a direction of possibility. It's like you only see what you're looking for. So if you keep staring at that door that was slammed in your face, you aren't going to make progress. But if you go, great, what does this crap make possible that was not possible before? And start looking for the opportunities hidden in the dog poop, you're going to find it.
What does success then mean to you? What's it look like?
Oh, that is a great question. I have my list of what success is for me in my calendar, and I see it on a regular basis.
Oh,
Uh,
okay. Wow.
yeah, I think it's important to really understand the true nature of success. So for me, it is integrity, number one. If I am a person of integrity, that is so important. If I lose that, nothing else matters. And then it's about being healthy, mind, body, and spirit. If I don't have my health, who cares if I'm the richest person in the cemetery? And then it's about community. I don't want to travel on this journey alone. I mean, we're blobs of protoplasm clinging to a giant rock, hurtling through outer space around a big ball of fire called the sun. And in a way, it's all kind of meaningless. But if we have a family of friends, colleagues, people we care about, and we go on this journey together, then we can create meaning. So that's pretty much the top three for me.
Wow. What about do you have like a favorite memory of running one of your companies or just something happening in your career?
Yes, my best miracle in my career, which really launched my business into the success zone, was meeting a woman called Yuko Shibata. She is a woman who was an executive in a Japanese company. You got to know how rare that was. She wrote one of the chapters in my book, Scrappy Project Management, and she transformed my life. That woman is the one who came over here and said to me, "You should come to Japan and do your workshops." And I said, "Buy me a ticket." And she brought me over to Japan every month or someplace else for Japanese companies every month for years and exposed me to opportunities that I would have never imagined. Truly, that woman transformed my life. And I cannot tell you what I would be today if it wasn't for Yugo Shibata.
Wow. And this is my last question. I end every podcast with this question is how would you like to be remembered?
I want to be remembered as somebody who transformed the little part of planet Earth that she impacted for the better and left a legacy that made people smile and feel warm heart when they think back on the contribution that she made.
Kimberly, it was a huge pleasure to have you on the Establishing Your Empire podcast. This episode was fantastic, and I really just appreciate your time.
Daran, it was one of the most intense, incredible conversations I've had in a long time. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. It's my pleasure.